Get out! We don't let dogs in the building.
That's what Gerald Crawford said. 3 feet from a black woman, 12 people watching.
I'm here for my 2 o'clock interview.
Gerald laughed.
Interview? You? I've seen monkeys at the zoo with newer, better resumes than whatever you're holding.
I graduated top of my class. It's all on page 1.
He stepped closer.
You people can barely spell your own names, and you think you deserve a seat at this table?
He grabbed her folder, tossed it on the floor.
Pick that up, walk out, and crawl back to whatever gutter your mama dragged you out of.
Dead silence. 12 witnesses. 0 voices. Whitney still sat down. Because she wasn't there for a job. She was the discrimination lawyer behind a $1.8 billion case. And this fool just handed her everything she needed. To understand what Whitney Owens was really doing in that lobby, you need to go back 16 years. South Memphis, Tennessee. A 2-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper, 1 working lamp, and a kitchen table that doubled as a desk. That's where 10-year-old Whitney did her homework every night. Alone. No father. He left before she could remember his face. Just a name on a birth certificate. And an empty chair at the table. Her mother, Lorraine Owens, worked double shifts at the Grandview Hotel downtown. Housekeeper. 6 days a week. 14 years straight. Lorraine could clean a suite in 18 minutes. She knew every guest's preference before they checked in. Management loved her work. They just didn't love her. One afternoon, Whitney came to the hotel after school. She was supposed to wait in the break room. Instead, she wandered down the 3rd-floor hallway looking for her mother, and found her on her hands and knees outside room 312, scrubbing a stain out of the carpet with a toothbrush. Standing over her was the floor supervisor, a woman named Brenda Cole, 8 months on the job, white, 20 years younger than Lorraine. "You missed a spot," Brenda said. Not bending down, not pointing, just standing there with her arms folded, watching Lorraine scrub like she was watching a dog perform a trick. Lorraine didn't look up. "Yes, ma'am." Whitney stood at the end of that hallway. 10 years old, backpack hanging off one shoulder. She didn't understand the word humiliation yet, but she understood what she was seeing. Her mother on her knees. A woman half her experience standing over her. And nobody in that hotel who cared enough to say a word. That night, Lorraine came home and cried at the kitchen table. The supervisor position she'd applied for, the one she'd trained for, covered shifts for, stayed late for, they gave it to Brenda. Brenda with her 8 months. Lorraine with her 14 years. "They said I wasn't ready." Lorraine's voice was flat, dead. Like someone who'd stopped expecting anything a long time ago. 14 years and I'm still not ready. Whitney sat next to her mother. She didn't understand labor law. She didn't know the word discrimination. But she understood something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. She whispered it to herself, like a promise. "That's not fair." Remember that line. 4 years later, Whitney was the only kid at Southside High carrying law books thicker than her backpack. Classmates called her Judge Judy. Boys threw paper at her head in study hall. Teachers told her to aim for something more realistic. A guidance counselor once said, "Honey, lawyers come from families that can afford law school." Whitney stared at the woman until she looked away. At 17, she earned a full scholarship to Howard University, first person in her family to set foot on a college campus. She called Lorraine from the admissions office, hands shaking. "Mama, I got in." Lorraine went silent for 10 seconds. Then, "Baby, you better not be playing with me." "I'm not playing, Mama. Full ride." Lorraine cried for the second time Whitney had ever heard. But this time, it sounded different. This time, it sounded like something unlocking. Howard changed everything. Whitney didn't just study law, she swallowed it whole. Constitutional law, civil procedure, employment discrimination statutes. She graduated top of her class at 22, passed the bar at 24, and chose her specialty without a second thought. Employment discrimination law. The exact thing that broke her mother. Now, Gerald Crawford. If Whitney built herself from nothing, Gerald was built from everything. 56 years old. VP of Human Resources at Greystone Staffing for 18 years. Corner office, season tickets, golf on Saturdays with board members who called him by his first name. Gerald wasn't stupid. He was careful. He never put anything in writing. He never raised his voice in a meeting. He just built a system. Quietly, patiently, where certain people got through and certain people didn't. And he enjoyed it. Not in a loud way, in a small, private way. The way a man enjoys closing a door in someone's face and knowing they can't do a thing about it. Recruiters learned fast. If a minority candidate made it past the first screen, Gerald would flag the file. Not the right cultural fit. Clean, professional, impossible to challenge. And if anyone questioned it, their next performance review got very uncomfortable very fast. In 18 years, not a single complaint against him had ever stuck. Greystone Staffing itself was a fortress. Fortune 500, 12,000 employees, 30 states. Their website had a diversity page with stock photos of smiling Black professionals and a mission statement about building inclusive futures. The numbers told a different story. Fewer than 3% of management positions went to Black candidates. Complaints were quietly settled. Whistleblowers signed NDAs and disappeared. On paper, Greystone was a model company. In practice, it was a machine, and Gerald Crawford was the man who kept it running. Whitney Owens was about to walk straight into that machine, but not as a victim. Never as a victim. The first time Whitney walked into a courtroom as a lawyer, the bailiff asked her if she was the defendant. She was 25. New suit, new briefcase. 2 years of top grades at Howard, and a bar exam score in the 98th percentile. None of it showed on the outside, at least not to the people who weren't looking. She found her place at Braddock & Associates, a small civil rights firm in downtown Atlanta run by Eleanor Braddock. Eleanor was 63 years old, 5'2", and had more courtroom wins than most lawyers twice her size. She'd been fighting discrimination cases since the 70s. Her office walls were covered in framed newspaper clippings and thank you letters from people whose names never made the headlines. Eleanor took one look at Whitney's file and hired her on the spot. "You've got fire," Eleanor told her that first day. "But fire doesn't win cases." She tapped the stack of folders on her desk. "Evidence wins cases. Mountains of it. You bring me a mountain, and I'll help you move it." Whitney took that literally. Her first year, she handled 8 cases, small ones. A janitor fired for reporting mold in a school basement. A warehouse worker denied promotion after 15 years. A nurse written up for attitude problems the same week she filed a harassment complaint. Each case was different. The pattern was the same. She won 5, lost 3. The wins felt good. Quiet, private victories. A settlement check, a reinstatement letter, a handshake in a hallway. Nobody made the news. Nobody threw a parade. But the people she helped remembered, and that was enough. The losses were a different thing entirely. The worst was Denise Holloway. Denise was a 5th-grade teacher in Cobb County, 41 years old, 18 years in the same school, loved by her students, respected by parents. Then one day her principal, a man named Garrett Sims, called her into his office and told her she was being reassigned. No explanation, no warning, just a box and a hallway and the sound of her classroom door closing behind her. What Garrett Sims didn't put in the paperwork was what he'd said to her the month before, that her natural hair was unprofessional and that maybe she should try to look more like the other teachers. Denise filed a complaint with the school board. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Whitney took the case pro bono. She believed in it. She could see the pattern. She could feel the injustice sitting right there on the surface, obvious as daylight. But feelings don't hold up in court. Evidence does. Garrett Sims never put his comments in writing. No emails, no witnesses willing to testify. The school board's lawyer argued that Denise was reassigned due to budget restructuring, a claim backed by a conveniently timed memo dated 2 days before the move. Whitney challenged the timeline. She questioned the memo's authenticity. She fought for 3 months. The judge ruled in favor of the school board. Insufficient documentation. Denise Holloway lost her position. Then she lost her apartment, couldn't make rent on a substitute teacher's pay. Last Whitney heard, Denise was living with her sister in Savannah, tutoring kids on weekends for grocery money. Whitney sat in her car after the verdict for 45 minutes. She didn't drive. She didn't call anyone. She just sat there with her hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, letting the weight of it settle into her bones. Eleanor found her later that evening, still at the office, staring at Denise's file. "You did everything right," Eleanor said. "Then why did she lose everything?" Eleanor sat down across from her. She didn't sugarcoat it. "Because the system isn't built to protect people like Denise. It's built to protect people like Garrett Sims. And until you have enough evidence to make the system choke on its own lies, it will keep winning." Whitney closed the file. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She made a decision. Never again. Never again would she lose a case because someone destroyed the evidence before she could get to it. From now on, she would get there first. That decision would change everything. 6 months later, Eleanor received an anonymous call. A woman's voice. Nervous. Clipped. She refused to give her name at first, just said she worked at a staffing company and had seen things. Bad things. Things that had been going on for years. Her name was Patricia Nolan, former senior recruiter at Greystone Staffing. Patricia told Eleanor about a system, an internal scoring tool that flagged minority candidates with a label called cultural fit. On the surface, it looked like a standard evaluation metric. Underneath, it was a filter. Any applicant flagged with cultural fit concerns was automatically moved to the bottom of the pile. It didn't matter if they had the best resume in the stack. They never got the call. The system had been running for over a decade. Thousands of applicants. Hundreds of positions. And the man who managed it, the man who trained every recruiter to use it, was Gerald Crawford. Patricia had documents, internal memos, screenshots, but she was terrified. She'd signed a non-disclosure agreement when she left Greystone. If they found out she talked, they'd sue her into the ground, take back her severance, destroy her career. Eleanor brought the information to Whitney, spread it across the conference table like a war map. "This could be the biggest employment discrimination case in the country," Eleanor said. "Maybe the biggest ever. But it's fragile. If we move too fast, Greystone's lawyers will bury everything. The documents, the witnesses, all of it. And Patricia will be the first casualty." Whitney stared at the files. 400 potential victims across 30 states. Real people. Real careers destroyed. Then she did the math in her head. If they lost this case, those 400 people got nothing. Greystone would get stronger. Gerald Crawford would keep running his machine, and the next Denise Holloway, the next Lorraine Owens, would have nowhere to turn. Eleanor looked at her across the table. She was tired. 63 years of fighting, and it showed in her hands, in her voice, in the way she leaned against the chair like it was the only thing holding her up. "Whitney, I'm going to be honest with you. This might be the last big fight I have in me, so we need to get it right. We don't get a second shot at this." Whitney picked up the first file, opened it, started reading. She didn't go home that night. Eleanor laid it out the next morning. No sugarcoating, no inspirational speeches, just the facts. Statistics won't be enough, she said. She stood at the whiteboard in her office, uncapped a red marker, and drew a line down the center. On the left side, she wrote, "What we have." On the right, "What we need." The left side filled up fast. Patricia Nolan's testimony, internal memos showing the cultural fit scoring system, hiring data across 30 states showing a pattern so obvious a first-year law student could spot it. The right side had one word, circled twice. Direct evidence. "A judge will look at this," Eleanor said, tapping the left column. "And Greystone's lawyers will spend 6 months arguing that correlation isn't causation, that cultural fit is a legitimate metric, that Patricia Nolan is a disgruntled employee. They'll drown us in motions, depositions, and delays, and by the time we get to trial, half our plaintiffs will have settled for pennies or given up." She tapped the right column. "But if we walk into that courtroom with footage, with audio, of a Greystone executive actively discriminating against a candidate in real time? That's not a statistic. That's not an interpretation. That's a smoking gun. And no jury in this country will look away from it." Whitney already knew where this was going. "You need someone to go in." "I need someone to apply for a job at Greystone. A real application. Real resume. Walk in as a candidate, experience the process firsthand, and document everything." "With a wire," Eleanor hesitated. She set the marker down. "It's dangerous, Whitney. If they figure out who you are, if they connect you to this firm or to Patricia, the whole case falls apart. They'll argue about entrapment. They'll argue fraud. Every piece of evidence we've built becomes contaminated." "Georgia is a one-party consent state," Whitney said. "I checked." "I know you checked. That's not what I'm worried about." Eleanor sat down. She looked older than Whitney had ever seen her. "I'm worried about you. You walk into that building and let them treat you like nothing, and you just have to take it. No response, no fight. You have to sit there and absorb it. Can you do that?" Whitney thought about Denise Holloway packing her classroom into a box. She thought about her mother crying at the kitchen table. She thought about 14 years and still not ready. "I can do that." They spent the next 3 weeks preparing. Whitney built a clean resume. Her real name, her real education, Howard University, bachelor's in business administration. She left out the law degree, left out Braddock and Associates, left out everything that mattered. On paper, she was exactly what she needed to be, a qualified, educated 26-year-old black woman applying for a mid-level HR coordinator position. The kind of candidate Greystone should have been hiring. The kind they never did. She studied the company the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. Annual reports, Glassdoor reviews, EEOC filings that went nowhere. She mapped every office, every division, every hiring manager's track record. One name kept rising to the top. Gerald Crawford, VP of Human Resources, Atlanta Division. In 6 years under his oversight, over 800 management positions were filled. 11 went to black candidates. 11 out of 800. And not a single one in the last 2 years. Gerald Crawford wasn't just part of the problem. He was the center of it. Eleanor ran her through mock interviews, played the role of the hostile manager, through insults, condescension, loaded questions, anything to rattle her. Whitney absorbed every hit. "Don't react," Eleanor told her, over and over. "Don't argue. Don't educate. Don't prove a point. You're not there to win the argument. You're there to let them show you exactly who they are." The morning of the interview, Whitney stood in front of her bathroom mirror. Black blazer, white blouse, hair pulled back. She looked professional. She looked ready. Her hands told a different story. A slight tremor she couldn't quite control. She reached into her dresser drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder. Tested it twice. Battery full, memory is clear. She slipped it into the inside pocket of her blazer, right against her chest. Georgia Code Section 161166, one-party consent. She had read it so many times she could recite it backward. Then she opened the closet and took out something else. A small leather notebook, soft and worn at the edges. Her mother's. Lorraine had kept it for years. A handwritten record of every time she was passed over, every shift she covered that someone else got credit for, every promise the hotel made and never kept. One page near the middle, in Lorraine's careful handwriting. Applied for supervisor. They said I wasn't ready. I've been ready for 15 years. Whitney ran her fingers across the words. Then she slipped the notebook into her bag. She looked at herself one more time, whispered the same 3 words she'd whispered at 10 years old, sitting next to her crying mother at the kitchen table. That's not fair. Then she picked up her keys and walked out the door. The gray stone staffing building stood like a monument to money. Glass and steel, 32 floors, the kind of lobby where your shoes echo. Whitney signed in at the reception desk. The woman behind the counter glanced at her, paused, just a half-second longer than necessary, then slid the clipboard across without a word. Whitney sat down. Other candidates filtered in, mostly white, well-dressed, relaxed, the kind of people who walked into rooms like this and felt like they belonged. Whitney watched them get called in, one by one. Candidates who arrived after her went first. 15 minutes passed. 20. 30. She didn't move. She didn't ask. Then the double doors opened and Gerald Crawford walked out. Big man. Expensive suit. The kind of jaw that looked like it had never been hit. He scanned the lobby the way a man scans a room he owns, not looking for anyone, just confirming that everything was in its proper place. His eyes landed on Whitney. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise. Something quieter. A tightening around the mouth. A flicker behind the eyes the people like Gerald think nobody notices. He noticed her the way you notice something that doesn't belong. And Whitney noticed him noticing. She pressed her arm gently against her blazer pocket, felt the recorder. Steady. Running. This was it. Gerald Crawford didn't shake her hand. He walked her to a small conference room at the end of the hall. Not his office, not the main interview suite where the other candidates had gone. A windowless box with a folding table and 2 plastic chairs. The kind of room where you put people you've already decided don't matter. He sat down. Didn't offer her water. Didn't make small talk. He picked up her resume with 2 fingers, like it smelled bad, and scanned it for exactly 4 seconds. Howard University, he read. Flat, bored, like he was reading a grocery receipt. Yes, sir. Bachelor's in Business Administration, graduated with honors. Gerald dropped the resume on the table. So where did you really go? Whitney felt her pulse spike. She kept her voice level. Howard University. It's on page 1. I can read. He leaned back, folded his arms. I'm asking where you really learned your skills. Community college? Online program? Because I've seen applications like this before. Looks great on paper, but when you get the person in the room... He gestured at her. All of her. Let the silence finish the sentence. The interview lasted 6 minutes. Other candidates had gotten 30. Gerald asked 4 questions, each one designed not to evaluate her, but to remind her she was unwelcome. He didn't write a single note. At the end, he stood up before she did. We'll keep your application on file. He said it the way a man says, "Have a nice day," when he means the opposite. Whitney gathered her folder, stood, followed him toward the lobby. And then the moment that changed everything. Gerald turned left down a side hallway. Didn't look back, didn't check if she was still behind him. He assumed she was already gone. Why would he check? She was nobody to him. Just another file for the bottom of the pile. But Whitney was still there, 3 steps behind, close enough to hear every word. Gerald's assistant, Todd Billings, was waiting in the hallway with a tablet. Gerald didn't slow down. "Another diversity checkbox," Gerald said, almost yawning. "Flag it. Cultural fit. You know the drill." Todd hesitated. "The new directive from corporate says we're supposed to document the reasoning for every—" "I've been doing this for 18 years, Todd." Gerald's voice dropped. Not angry, just certain. The kind of certainty that comes from never being questioned. Nobody has ever checked. Nobody ever will. File it and move on. He disappeared around the corner. Todd followed. Whitney stood alone in that hallway. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. But her hand was perfectly still, pressed flat against her blazer pocket. The recorder had caught everything, every word, every inflection. 18 years of discrimination confessed in a hallway by the man who built the system, because he was so sure of himself that he didn't even bother to look behind him. Whitney walked out of the building, through the glass lobby, past the reception desk, past the 12 witnesses who had watched her get humiliated and said nothing. She pushed through the front doors and didn't stop until she reached her car in the parking lot. She sat in the driver's seat, pulled out the recorder, hit playback. Gerald's voice filled the car, clear, casual, damning. Nobody has ever checked. Nobody ever will. Whitney's hands were shaking. Not from fear. Not anymore. She picked up her phone and called Eleanor. 1 sentence. That's all she needed. "I got him." 6 months. That's how long it took to turn one hallway recording into a federal lawsuit. Whitney and Eleanor worked in shifts, 18-hour days, takeout containers stacked on filing cabinets. Patricia Nolan's documents gave them the skeleton. The hiring data gave them the pattern. The recording gave them the weapon. But a class action lawsuit needs people. Whitney flew to 9 states in 4 months. Living rooms, break rooms, church basements. She found them one by one. Candidates Greystone had filtered out. Perfect qualifications, no callback. Made it to the interview, told they weren't the right fit. Got hired, but buried in entry-level positions while less qualified white colleagues got promoted above them. 438 plaintiffs. Owens et al. V. Greystone Staffing, Inc. $1.8 billion. The day the lawsuit was filed, Greystone's stock dropped 6% before lunch. Greystone didn't just hire lawyers, they hired a war machine. Howard and Prescott, 40 partners, 200 associates, a client list that included Fortune 100 companies. Leading the team was Victor Prescott, 62, silver hair, tailored everything. 30 years of corporate defense without a single loss. The legal press called him the Eraser, because when Victor took a case, the problem disappeared. His first move was designed to kill the lawsuit in its crib. Motion to dismiss. 46 pages. The argument was elegant in its brutality. Whitney Owens was never a real applicant. She concealed her identity, manufactured a confrontation, and obtained a recording through deception. The entire case was built on fraud. Throw it out. Pretrial hearing. Federal Courthouse, Atlanta. Judge Ruth Callahan presiding. 58, 15 years on the bench, known for sharp questions and zero tolerance for theatrics. The courtroom was packed. Media in the back rows, Greystone executives on the right, Whitney's plaintiffs on the left. Some had driven 8 hours. A retired bus driver from Mississippi, a single mother from Ohio who'd applied to Greystone 3 times and never heard back once. Victor Prescott stood first. Smooth, measured, every sentence rehearsed to perfection. Your Honor, this case is not about discrimination. It is about deception. Ms. Owens infiltrated my client's offices with a hidden device, misrepresented her intentions, and manufactured the very incident she now presents as evidence. If this court allows that to stand, no employer in America is safe from entrapment. He sat down. Eleanor squeezed Whitney's arm. Your turn. Whitney stood. No notes, no binder, hands at her sides. Your Honor, Mr. Prescott wants this court to believe that how discrimination was discovered matters more than the discrimination itself. One beat of silence. Georgia Code Section 161166 permits any party to record a conversation without the other party's consent. I was at a party. The recording is legal. That's not a gray area. She took one step forward. But here's what Mr. Prescott is really asking. He's asking you to look at 438 people in this courtroom and tell them the way they were treated doesn't matter. Because the person who caught it wasn't applying for the right reasons. She turned toward the plaintiffs, then back to the judge. Greystone filled 1,200 management positions in Gerald Crawford's division over 6 years. 11 went to black candidates. 11. That's not a coincidence. That's a system. And the man who ran it confessed on tape, not because he was tricked, but because he was so sure no one would ever hold him accountable that he said it out loud in a hallway. Silence. Judge Callahan looked at Prescott. Counselor, do you have a response to the one-party consent argument? Victor stood. For the first time, a half-second of hesitation. Your Honor, we maintain that the broader context of deception, the statute is clear, Mr. Prescott. I'm not hearing a legal counterargument. I'm hearing a preference. She picked up her pen. Motion to dismiss is denied. This case proceeds to trial. A sound moved through the courtroom. Not a cheer. A collective exhale. 438 people breathing at the same time. Victor Prescott gathered his papers. Face neutral. Professional. But as he turned to leave, he looked at Whitney. Really looked at her for the first time. He didn't see a young woman anymore. He saw a problem. Gerald Crawford didn't take the loss quietly. Within 48 hours of the motion being denied, Greystone's machine kicked into gear. And this time, they weren't aiming at the case. They were aiming at Whitney. It started with the media. A story appeared in the Atlanta Business Journal. No byline, just sources close to the company. The headline, activist lawyer posed as job applicant to manufacture discrimination claim. The article painted Whitney as a con artist, a fraud, a woman who walked into a legitimate business with a hidden microphone and a grudge. The story got picked up. Cable news ran a segment. Social media did the rest. Whitney's name became a hashtag, and not the kind she wanted. People who had never read a single page of the lawsuit had opinions about her character, her ethics, her motives. Then came the investigators. Greystone hired a private firm to dig into Whitney's past. Not the legal kind of digging, the personal kind. They pulled Lorraine's employment records, Whitney's scholarship applications, her college transcripts. They were looking for anything. A failed class, a disciplinary note, an unpaid bill, something to wave in front of a jury and say, this woman can't be trusted. They found nothing. But that didn't stop them from trying. 3 plaintiffs dropped out the same week. Each one received a letter from Greystone's legal team, carefully worded, technically legal, designed to terrify. The letters reminded them of the costs and consequences of pursuing litigation against a Fortune 500 company. One plaintiff, a former data analyst from North Carolina, called Whitney in tears. I can't do this. They know where my kids go to school. Whitney told her she understood. She didn't beg her to stay. She hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long time. Then Patricia Nolan disappeared. Whitney called her on a Tuesday. No answer. Called Wednesday. Voicemail full. By Thursday, she drove to Patricia's apartment in Decatur. The parking spot was empty. The mailbox was stuffed. A neighbor in the hallway said Patricia moved out over the weekend. No forwarding address, no goodbye. Eleanor didn't panic. Eleanor never panicked. But when Whitney told her, the old woman closed her eyes and pressed both palms flat on her desk, the way someone does when they're trying to keep the room from spinning. They got to her, Eleanor said. Bought her silence or scared her underground. Either way, she's gone. Without Patricia, they still had the recording. They still had the hiring data. They still had 435 plaintiffs. But a live witness, someone who'd worked inside the machine, who could sit on that stand and explain how it operated from the inside, that was irreplaceable. Victor Prescott knew it too. Whitney was certain of that. Somewhere in a corner office across town, the eraser was smiling. The night before the trial, Whitney sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by paper. Depositions, exhibits, motions. Her coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago. The clock on the wall said 2:14 a.m. She reached into her bag and pulled out her mother's notebook. The leather was softer now, worn smooth from all the times she'd held it. She opened it to the page she always opened it to. Lorraine's handwriting. Careful, steady. The handwriting of a woman who never got to use her voice, but refused to stop recording her own story. Applied for supervisor. They said I wasn't ready. I've been ready for 15 years. Whitney closed the notebook, picked up her phone, dialed. 3 rings. Baby, it's 2 a.m. Lorraine's voice, groggy, warm, worried. Mama, I'm scared. A pause. The kind of pause that holds 16 years of watching your daughter fight battles you never could. Good, Lorraine said. Means you're about to do something that matters. Whitney pressed the phone against her forehead, breathed. Tomorrow she would walk into a federal courtroom against a billion-dollar corporation with a missing witness, a hostile press, and 435 people who had bet everything on her. She had no backup plan, no safety net, no second chance. All she had was the truth, a tape recorder, and her mother's notebook. It would have to be enough. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and sweat. Every seat taken. People standing along the back wall, camera crews outside, security at every door. Whitney walked in at 8:47 a.m. Black suit, white blouse, her mother's notebook in her bag. She didn't look at the gallery. She didn't look at the cameras. She sat down at the plaintiff's table, opened her folder, and waited. Victor Prescott delivered his opening statement like a man giving a keynote speech. Relaxed, polished. 15 minutes of carefully constructed narrative. Greystone was a model employer. Whitney was a disgruntled activist. The cultural fit metric was standard practice used by companies across every industry in America. He made it sound reasonable. That was the danger. Whitney's opening took less than 3 minutes. She stood, picked up a single sheet of paper from the table, held it up so the jury could see the rows and columns printed on it. 1,200 management positions. Gerald Crawford's division. 6 years. She paused. Let the numbers sit. 11 went to black candidates. 11 out of 1,200. That's not a hiring practice, ladies and gentlemen. That's a policy. She set the paper down, sat down, said nothing else. The silence did the rest. 2 hours of witness testimony followed. Former applicants who described identical experiences, the short interviews, the condescending questions, the callbacks that never came. A data expert who broke down Greystone's hiring numbers county by county, year by year. The pattern wasn't subtle. It was a wall. Then Whitney called her final witness. The plaintiff calls Gerald Crawford. Gerald stood from the defense table, buttoned his jacket, walked to the stand with the confidence of a man who had practiced this moment in front of Victor Prescott's team for weeks. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, sat down. He looked calm, almost bored. Whitney started soft. Background questions. How long have you worked at Greystone? 18 years. What does the VP of Human Resources do? Oversees hiring, training, compliance. Standard answers. Comfortable rhythm. Gerald relaxed into the chair. Then Whitney shifted. Mr. Crawford, are you familiar with a metric your company calls cultural fit? Gerald nodded. Of course. It's a standard evaluation tool. Most companies use something similar. Can you define it for the court? Certainly. Cultural fit measures how well a candidate aligns with the values, work style, and team dynamics of the organization. And who decides whether a candidate meets that standard? The hiring manager, in consultation with HR. In your division, that would be you. Among others, yes. Whitney picked up a second sheet. Mr. Crawford, in the last 6 years, how many candidates in your division were flagged with cultural fit concerns? Gerald glanced at Victor. I don't have those numbers memorized. I do. Whitney handed the document to the court clerk. 312 candidates flagged. 289 of them were black. That's 92%. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Callahan tapped her gavel once. Quiet. Gerald's jaw tightened. Cultural fit is a subjective assessment. It's not based on race. 92%, Mr. Crawford. Whitney let it hang. Then she turned to the bench. Your Honor, the plaintiff requests permission to play Exhibit 14A. Victor Prescott was on his feet. Objection. The recording was obtained under... Overruled. The court has already addressed the admissibility of this evidence. Proceed, Ms. Owens. Whitney pressed play. Gerald Crawford's voice filled the courtroom. Casual, bored, certain. Another diversity checkbox. Flag it. Cultural fit. You know the drill. Then Todd Billings. The new directive from corporate says we're supposed to document. I've been doing this for 18 years, Todd. Nobody has ever checked. Nobody ever will. The recording ended. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming. Gerald's face had gone white. Not red. White. The color of a man watching the floor disappear beneath him. Whitney stepped forward, close enough that Gerald had to look at her. Mr. Crawford, do you recognize that voice? Silence. Mr. Crawford. Yes. Barely a whisper. That's your voice, correct? Yes. Whitney held his stare for 3 full seconds. Then she turned to the jury. The woman Mr. Crawford called a dog in his lobby. The woman he told to crawl back to the gutter. The woman he laughed out of his own building. She paused. I'm her. And I wasn't there for a job. I was there for the truth. The courtroom erupted. Judge Callahan's gavel came down 3 times before the noise settled. Gerald Crawford sat on the witness stand with his mouth half open. No words came out. 18 years of untouchable confidence. Gone in 90 seconds. Victor Prescott requested a recess. Before Judge Callahan could respond, the courtroom doors opened. Eleanor Braddock walked in, and behind her, a woman no one expected to see again. Patricia Nolan. She hadn't been bought. She hadn't been silenced. She'd gone into hiding on her own, terrified, alone, unable to sleep. Eleanor had spent 6 weeks tracking her down, knocking on doors, leaving voicemails. Patricia never returned. Until one night, Patricia called back. 2 words. I'll come. Patricia took the stand, confirmed everything. The coding system, Gerald's direct instructions, the years of cover-up. Then she pulled out a flash drive, personal backups of internal emails she'd saved before leaving Greystone. Gerald Crawford, in his own words, instructed recruiters to apply the cultural fit flag to minority candidates. Dates, names, specific positions. Victor Prescott didn't object. There was nothing left to object to. Judge Callahan looked at the defense table. Does counsel wish to cross-examine? Victor Prescott stared at his legal pad for a long moment. Then he shook his head. No, Your Honor. It was over. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 41 minutes. Whitney sat in the hallway outside the courtroom. She didn't pace. She didn't check her phone. She sat on a wooden bench with her hands folded in her lap and her mother's notebook beside her. Eleanor sat next to her. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. 20 months of work, the sleepless nights, the 9 states, the 438 names, the threats, the media attacks, Patricia's disappearance, Lorraine's hospital bills. All of it came down to 12 strangers in a locked room. At 4:23 p.m., the bailiff opened the door. They're ready. Whitney stood, picked up the notebook. I walked back in. The courtroom was even more packed than before. Word had spread. People who couldn't get seats stood in the corridor, watching through the glass panel in the door. 2 sketch artists in the front row, 3 cameras outside. The country was watching. The jury foreman stood, a man in his 50s, reading glasses, hands steady. Judge Callahan spoke first. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor, on the count of systemic employment discrimination in violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. What say you? Guilty. On the count of intentional racial bias in hiring practices. What say you? Guilty. On the count of retaliatory conduct against employees who filed internal complaints. What say you? Guilty. 3 words, 3 times. Each one landed like a hammer on stone. And on the matter of damages, the foreman looks down at the paper, then up. The jury awards the plaintiffs $1.8 billion. The courtroom didn't erupt this time. It broke open. Someone in the gallery started crying. Then another. Then a wave. 435 people who had been told for years that what happened to them didn't matter, hearing a jury say it did. Whitney didn't move. She stood at the plaintiff's table with her hands flat on the wood, eyes open, breathing steady. She heard every sound in that room, the crying, the gasping, the reporters scrambling for their phones. But she didn't react. Not yet. Eleanor put a hand on her shoulder. Whitney covered it with her own. That was enough. On the other side of the courtroom, Gerald Crawford sat motionless, hands in his lap, staring at the table. The man who had spent 18 years building a machine that sorted human beings by the color of their skin. The man who had laughed a woman out of his lobby and called her a dog, had nothing left. No confidence, no smirk, no corner office waiting for him. Just a wooden chair and the sound of his own voice on a tape that the whole country had now heard. He was escorted out through a side door. No press conference, no statement. In the hallway, he passed within 5 feet of Whitney. He stopped. Whitney looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph. She just looked at him the way you look at something that's finally been named for what it is. Gerald opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it, dropped his eyes, kept walking. His silence said more than 18 years of words ever did. 3 weeks later, Greystone Staffing terminated Gerald Crawford. He faced personal civil liability in excess of $12 million. His name would appear in law school textbooks for the next 50 years, not as a leader, but as a lesson. Whitney walked out of the courthouse into golden afternoon light. She pulled out her phone. One number, one ring. Lorraine picked up before the second ring. She'd been watching the news. She already knew. Baby. That's all Lorraine could say at first. Just that word, over and over. Baby. 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 We did it, Mama. You did it. No. Whitney's voice cracked for the first time in 20 months. This was always for you. Every single day of this, it was for you. Lorraine was crying too hard to answer. Whitney leaned against the courthouse wall, opened her bag, took out the leather notebook, ran her fingers across the page she knew by heart. Applied for supervisor. They said I wasn't ready. I've been ready for 15 years. She closed it gently, held it against her chest. Lorraine's voice came back, broken and beautiful. Your daddy would have been so proud. Whitney looked up at the sky, breathed. I know, Mama. I know. The verdict made national news before the sun went down. Every major network, every front page, every timeline. But the case didn't end in that courtroom. It rippled. Congress opened hearings on corporate hiring practices within 6 weeks. 3 other Fortune 500 companies launched voluntary audits before subpoenas forced them to. New legislation was drafted, the Workplace Fairness Transparency Act, requiring companies with over 500 employees to publish annual hiring demographics. Legal scholars called it the most significant employment discrimination ruling in 30 years. Greystone Staffing was placed under federal oversight. Within 2 years, their minority hiring rate tripled. Not because they wanted to change, because Whitney Owens made them. Eleanor Braddock retired 8 months after the verdict. Bad knees, tired hands, a lifetime of fights finally catching up. She signed the firm over to Whitney on a Tuesday afternoon. No ceremony, no champagne, just a handshake and a set of keys. It's yours now, Eleanor said. Don't let it get dusty. Whitney renamed the foundation she built with the settlement funds. She called it the Lorraine Owens Initiative, free legal representation for workers facing employment discrimination. No retainer, no income requirement, just a phone number and a promise. If you've been treated unfairly at work because of who you are, someone will fight for you. In 3 years, the initiative helped over 2,000 workers across 22 states. Whitney still carries her mother's notebook to every courtroom. She still opens it to the same page before every opening statement. She says it keeps her honest, keeps her angry in the right way. She speaks at universities now, tells students the same thing every time. The people who laugh at you are telling you exactly where the fight is. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been laughed out of a room, told you don't belong, looked at like you're less than, drop a comment. Tell me your story. I read every single one. Hit subscribe. We tell stories like this every week. Stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things when nobody believed in them. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs a reminder that their voice matters.
18 years, Gerald Crawford believed nobody would ever check. He was wrong. A $1.8 billion case didn't start in a courtroom. It started at the kitchen table in South Memphis, where a 10-year-old girl got her mother crying. After 14 years of loyalty, got her nothing. That's not fair. 3 words that all Whitney whispered that night, and she spent 16 years turning those 3 words into something the whole country had to hear. She didn't fight to punish a man. She fought because silence is what keeps system like his alive. Every recruiter who flagged a resume and said nothing, every lobby full of witnesses who look away, Whitney proved that one voice with the right evidence can make a system choke on its own lies. But here's what I want you to sit with. If nobody had ever checked on Gerald Crawford, would he still be running that machine right now? How many rooms are you walking into where nobody checked that? If you ever been underestimated, drop your story in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe, share it with someone who needs it. The people who laugh at you are telling you exactly where the fight is.